this whole notion of preparedness for treatment. Are you asking them that? Are they prepared for treatment? And if they're not, do you have a mechanism to make sure that you can follow up with them to make things right?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to PeopleMetrics Live. Today, we're going to help you get your Pharma Patient Support Services feedback program ready for a great year in 2021 with some tips, tricks, and best practices from our team to yours. Let's just kick it off and jump right into it. Why should patient experience be a top priority in 2021?
Well, for patient support services teams, and that's really what we're going to focus on today, because patient experience is a big topic, but we're talking about the patient experience with patient support services offered either by pharmaceutical companies or through partner hubs. I don't know if there could be anything more important that these teams could focus on than measuring and improving the patient and HCP experience with support services offered. There's such big investments these days in this area. It's growing, it seems like by the month. Every time we look at data, we're seeing more and more investment in this area. And when you invest more and more in an area, it seems very logical that you'd want to measure how well it's going and improve it over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think exactly to what you said, patient support services are an investment, then a rather substantial investment. And so you really want to collect feedback to let you know how you're doing with this investment that you've made. In cases of how aware are patients of the work we're doing? How satisfied are they? Are they using these services? For many of our clients, it is a very helpful tool in order for them to demonstrate also internally, here's the importance of the work we do, and we can hear it from patients themselves, how much they value this item they receive.
I mean, the other thing that we see, right, Kirk, is that this is definitely a leading indicator of outcomes and behavior. So when we're measuring the patient experience with patient support services, and we ask a question around preparedness for treatment, which we think is a key question. We can get to other questions later, but that's such a key question. After they've gone through the support services offered, if they're prepared for treatment, that's a very, very good indicator, leading indicator that they're going to onboard and adhere over time, and hopefully their health outcomes, follow suit. And if they aren't prepared, they're very unlikely to onboard. They're unlikely to get the outcomes that we all want for the patient. But I would say if you're not measuring kind of the patient experience with patient support services, it's almost like not measuring the scripts written by the doctors for your drug, because they're intertwined and they're absolutely connected, and one is leading the other. And it's really just, we think it's vital to do that. And, you've run a lot of these programs, so, you see the data firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. We've, in the work we've done, seen that, been able to show how if you are more satisfied, if you're having a better patient experience, you are more likely to onboard and adhere and stay on that treatment. And just naturally, it makes sense. The whole reason these support programs exist is because pharmaceutical companies understand it can be difficult to get onto treatment, and that can mean that people drop off. So when you measure that experience with your program, if folks are having a poor experience, that means it's still hard for them, and that's something you still need to improve.
Hi, it's Madeline. Thanks for joining us for PeopleMetrics Live. If this is your first time watching, PeopleMetrics Live is a weekly live webinar session where experts from our team answer your questions about customer, employee, and patient experience measurement and management. We've been doing this for almost 2 decades now, and this is a great way for us to share our knowledge with you. You can sign up for upcoming sessions of PeopleMetrics Live at www.peoplemetrics.com/events, and bring a friend.
Okay, so how has the patient experience changed, you think, around patient support services due to COVID-19? What are some things that have been a little different this year?
That's a great question. And I think it wouldn't be any surprise to folks listening on this call that adjusting to COVID has caused a lot of changes to patient support programs. On the whole, a broader shift that we see is that there is a bigger move to serving patients and HCPs digitally. So the way that folks are delivering their support services has changed in this year in a significant way.
Yeah, you mentioned HCPs, and they're an important stakeholder to consider here, because the way most patients get information about the support services offered, either directly through a pharmaceutical company or a partner hub, right? Could be either, or both, right? In certain circumstances, they get that through the HCP, right? And the HCP needs to be very up to date and being able to articulate easily to those patients what's available. And with COVID kind of changing the way people are interacting with each other in general, and certainly the way pharma is interacting with HCPs, it's got to change things, and it's a challenge, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really exactly as you said, it's disrupting the channels through which you normally communicate with these groups. So with HCPs, it's certainly been a difficult year because how do they get their patients onto therapy when they are just having a hard time meeting their patients in the first place? And then how can they better manage that process? For these programs where it's a copay card, it's often they'll give you a card in the office to, here's how you reach this support program. Well, what do you do if the patient's not in the office? Suddenly, this is a hurdle that's not just for the patient, but also for the HCP and how they communicate this. So this channel is disrupted. How do you come up with a new channel? And then how do you make sure the experience is still there? Certainly for the HCPs and then for the patient as well. This is, of course, very disruptive to them. They have a routine. They have this kind of visit that they're trying to get to, and how you're able to schedule these, how you're able to actually visit is totally kind of uprooted. And so we've seen kind of those same changes and impacts on the patient experience with those shifts.
Madeline, we just put out a blog post, or maybe we're doing this next week, right? We wrote a blog post this week on some norms that we're seeing in patient experience with patient support services. And one of the lower scoring questions that we're seeing over time is this just general question of patients being aware of the patient support services offered, right? So that's a challenge. And the fact that HCPs are an entity that need to be reached and need to be communicated with clearly, that's probably one of the bigger bottlenecks we're seeing in the experience for patients. They just don't know what's available. And that's probably because the HCP doesn't know. And that's probably because the pharma company could be having challenges communicating that clearly to the HCP so they can talk to the patient. Right? That was like a 40% number, I believe, in that blog post, Madeline, right? Like four out of 10 patients felt like, yeah, they knew, they were confident of all the services offered, but that means 6 out of 10 weren't.
Yeah, and to that point, I think you mentioned in that HCP introduction there, from what we've seen this year, HCPs is where things have taken a hit, especially because it is on the patient side, you're assisting getting to treatment, so there's a benefit and satisfaction there. For HCPs, this is just much harder as far as getting their patients on therapy. And in every case, what we find for all of our clients is the gaps and the pitfalls are going to be different for each and every company because your process, your medication, the insurance coverage is all going to be unique. And so understanding that pitfall where you're falling off due to COVID is often going to be something you need to measure directly because it's specific to you.
Let me bring this back to our audience. How do you plan for next year around this? Let's say you have a patient support services program. It's either your own or a partner hub. I think the first question you might want to ask yourself is, do you have any measurement going on at all? So if you don't, I think this is a great time to start thinking about that. And if you do have measurement going on around the patient and HCP experience, it may be time to take another look at it. So where would you suggest people begin if they were either going to start a new program or reevaluate kind of what they're doing today, Kirk?
So the way you framed it is right, because whether or not you are starting totally from scratch and you don't have any feedback in place today, or if you have a program existing, the starting point is going to be the same. Given how much has changed in 2020, where you want to start, first of all, is within what we call a touch point audit of how do patients and HCPs interact with you, and do you have that full process mapped out? Because you need to know how we're interacting with these folks before you can then decide how to then measure it.
So this is about looking at the entire patient journey and really the HCP journey. So it's the HCP first, like how do we communicate? What are our interactions with the HCP to enable them to understand what we offer? What is that communication like between the HCP and the patient, which is something you have to, the only way you would get that is if you measure it somehow, right? And we can help, of course, do that and have in the past. And then every time the patient interacts with you through their onboarding and even after, what are each one of those touch points? What do they look like? How do they do that? Right? Do you have case managers where the patient can call, or is this a purely digital offering? Or is it something in between where they have access to both? Or do you have a contact center with not dedicated case managers, but people who are, you can pass along the question to whomever's there? Like, what are the different ways? Do you have a chat feature? Is there an SMS way that people can ask questions? There's all these different possible touch points these days, right? And a lot of them are going digital.
Yeah, and I think the way you described it there's almost 2 dimensions of this, which is kind of what are the steps of the patient and HCP journey of starting with diagnosis, onto being prescribed something, then to insurance coverage. So going through that journey. Then there's also the second dimension. What are the channels at each of these phases that patients and HCPs have to interact with you? Because it may be at the insurance coverage phase, we're doing really well with patients who we're communicating with via email, as we're able to keep good track of the records, but folks who we're calling in with, they feel less satisfied. And so mapping out what are those points and what are those channels is really critical to understanding the full picture.
Yeah. If I had to give some advice, the first thing would be take a hard, long look at your touch point that you have with your key stakeholders, patients, HCPs. Second thing I would recommend is, how is your opt-in going in terms of being able to reach out to patients and HCPs to get feedback on their experiences with your patient support services? And do those opt-ins include email opt-ins, which may have a connection to marketing, it's probably and. Have you begun a process where you can get text, sending mobile text to patients to get feedback from them? Because that's where a lot of people are wanting to communicate these days.
Yeah, and that is often a key portion. When we're talking with companies, we're often talking with companies that are still in the clinical stage with their medications, because they're mapping out and understanding, in the future, I'm going to launch these services. I need to have my ducks in a row if I want to start this and really hit the ground running. So for those opt-ins, even if it's not necessarily yours, if you're working with a hub provider, or if you're working with a specialty pharmacy, or if it is internal, that's something that the earlier you're aware of it, the better. And one last thing I note on that, don't have it be overwhelming. People change their opt-in language. You receive those kinds of terms of service update with your phones. Just because you have to talk to the marketing team, or you have to talk to some other team, this isn't something that should stop you or be overwhelming. This is a normal part of the process that you just need to incorporate and have it checked off.
But it's a good thing for people who use partner hubs, where they don't have to worry about the patient experience, right, Kirk? Because they're not delivering it.
That's where we can go wrong. Absolutely. And I think that the way we tend to think about it, if you're working with a partner hub, you are just as responsible for that experience, if not more so. This is someone who's delivering an experience on your behalf, and you need to make sure that experience is there.
I was joking with you a little bit, right? But it's
absolutely.
Yeah, if you're using partner hubs, which is there are great ones out there, being able to measure and understand the patient experience that they're delivering on your behalf, I think is in many ways even more important than if you're doing it yourself, because you're kind of one step away from it. And having those metrics and that understanding is really important.
Oh, definitely. And I think when it comes to working with partner hubs, one thing that's important is to take a step back from kind of how you see it. To you, as someone who runs these patient support programs, it's very clear to you, I'm working with a hub. To a patient, all of this is behind the curtain. So they don't know that they're working with someone else. To them, it's all you. And so if something goes wrong, that's on you.
Did you know that you can watch past sessions of PeopleMetrics Live right here on our YouTube channel? Be sure to check them out for answers to dozens of questions, along with stories, tips, and best practices from our team of experts. Click the bottom right corner of this video to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an update.
So let's get back to some practical tips on planning for 2021. So we talked about, make sure you're choosing the right touch point or touch points to measure. So if you've shifted a lot digitally, make sure you're measuring that digital experience. If you have a high touch model, which is often the case for rare disease with case managers, make sure you're measuring the patient interactions with them in the entire process. Or if you have some sort of hybrid model, that's great too. But it's important for touch points too. You want to make sure that you have permission to reach out to patients and or HCPs to understand what their experience is. The third thing I would say is just making sure you're asking the right questions, right? These programs are only as good as the questions asked and the data that comes out from it. So Kirk, where would you recommend a company begin when thinking about what kind of questions they should ask patients around their experience around patient support services?
So generally, when you're collecting feedback, it should really all be around the idea of how can we best serve these patients? How can we improve their experience? And all of your questions should be catered towards that, towards what's fundamentally important to patients. At PeopleMetrics, we've developed a questionnaire that we call the PX15 questionnaire. It is a short, up to 15 question survey that goes through the building blocks that we've heard from patients of, this is what I care about when I'm interacting with the patient support team. And it generally goes through financial elements, logistical elements, the medication administration support system, and so forth. And so asking questions targeted to what matters to patients and making sure you understand those drivers, that's going to be key.
Yeah, and normally we'd recommend, all else being equal, that you start with the onboarding experience, right? Because if you don't get them onboarded, then almost nothing else matters. So that's where a lot of our programs begin. And if I were starting a program from scratch or looking to evaluate a program that's already existing, I'd certainly recommend that why don't we focus on what the patient experience is with onboarding? And a lot of those questions that you just mentioned really apply well to that. So when a patient onboards into a new medication, what do they absolutely need to have? They need to make sure they can pay for it. So they have to know about insurance and financial type things. They need to know where to find the drug, where can they get it, and how do they administer it if it's a complex medication. And then, like you said, you need a support system. So do I know where I can go to find answers to my questions? That could be a case manager, that could be a website, that could be both, that could be a bunch of different things. And then the question that I mentioned earlier in the discussion today is this whole notion of preparedness for treatment. Are you asking them that? Are they prepared for treatment? And if they're not, do you have a mechanism to make sure that you can follow up with them to make things right? And I know you've worked with a lot of programs that have such things.
Yeah, to that point, if you're starting from scratch and don't have feedback today, onboarding is a perfect place to start. That is that critical milestone. That is really where you're going to hear a lot and you're going to find out a lot about what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. If you already have a program in place and you're already serving onboarding, the lens that you really want to view it through is like, what are our key moments? What are the key milestones in the product delivery? Another big one is going to be, if you have a change in insurance, that's going to be another key area to a patient where you want to make sure you're collecting feedback. Or even if it's just time on treatment. You've been on this medication for 6 months, we're checking in. How has that experience been? So really, onboarding is great if you haven't done anything before and you want to make sure you're measuring that. And then if you're looking to build on that program, keep thinking to those most important milestones from a patient perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way to put it. If you're thinking about next year, making sure you're doing an onboarding touch point survey. And if you want to expand to that, maybe a 6-month, 12-month after onboarding, those are really good milestones. And then if you want to go beyond that, we've done this for a bunch of our clients. In addition to that, we'll do a full-blown relationship survey for every single patient that's on the medication and understand how many of them are even aware of patient support services, those that are, which ones that they're aware of, which ones do they take advantage of, which ones do they find most valuable. If you have any new technologies that you're looking to introduce to support the patients, you can actually introduce it there and ask questions about it. It's a really great way to just keep in touch with your patient population at least once a year for everybody.
Yeah, and that's a great point of the relationship survey. And those especially are great end of year or beginning of the year projects because it's helping when you're collecting a broader range of, this is a longer relationship style survey for us to collect feedback on everything we give to our patients. That helps you drive direction for the rest of the year and really clarify that focus.
Yeah. The other thing I think it's worth mentioning for 21 is there's a lot of market research that goes on in pharmaceutical companies. We know that. And there's definitely elements to this market research to what we're talking about here, but there's more to it than that, right? So this is an opportunity to get your patient and HCP feedback in front of people across the organization. So if you have case managers using platforms like PeopleMetrics software, they can see their own patient data and how their patients felt about the experience from them. You can move this and show this to your brand managers. If it's a digital offering, you can show it to your digital marketing teams to make sure that they understand the kind of experiences your patients are having with the digital offerings and interactions that they're providing. So it's a really great opportunity to be truly patient-centric, which we know is a term that pharma uses a lot. This is a way to absolutely make it real for a lot of different stakeholders within the company.
Yeah. Once you've gone through these steps of knowing your touch points, having your patients touch it and collecting that feedback, you need to make sure you share it after you've gone through all that work. This isn't market research. Everybody should see it. There are very few things that are more impactful than actual direct feedback from a patient. You are trying to impact change in your organization and how you're delivering your product. So you need to make sure that you share that out so if people understand the impact of the work you're doing has on these patients.
Our founder and CEO, Sean, wrote an amazing book about customer experience measurement called Listen or Die, 40 Lessons That Turn Customer Feedback into Gold. It's a deep dive into best practices for CX measurement based off of Sean's years of experience in the space, and you can easily read it front to back on an airplane ride. Be sure to check it out. It's available now on Amazon.
Yeah, and I think down the line, another piece that I would think of is, there's so many now patient support services offerings, right? We're seeing it attached to almost every new product coming to market.
Yeah.
And understanding how you're comparing compared to others who are delivering those same services, I think is valuable. And the blog post that I referred to earlier, which will be out next week, kind of identifies some areas of comparison that you can have, and just being able to kind of evaluate that. Like, am I best in class? Am I in the middle? Do I have some things to catch up on? That wouldn't be the first thing that I would put in the plan, but it would be in the plan for kind of the longer term. What else do we have, Madeline, that we want to talk about today?
I've just got a couple questions actually in the Q&A here. So first question I've got here is, what should I do if I'm using more than one provider?
That's a great question. Something we do have with some of our clients, as some of these medications, you'll have a separate specialty pharmacy, you'll have a hub, some of it will be sourced internally. And the best thing to do is to make sure you do have one style of feedback that's being collected throughout these. Yeah. That way, you are able to measure across these and say, we're sending out the same kind of survey, the same kind of way. How does the experience change across? So you have a consistent baseline. Often kind of hubs and especially pharmacy, you can have more quality assurance of listening into a call, something like that, but it's not consistent feedback that's being measured, which is very important. So if you have multiple providers, the thing you want to do is start early on, as we said, with making sure you have that opt-in language where you're able to receive this patient information, reach out to them, and then have a feedback program that is consistent across these groups.
Yeah, there couldn't be anything more important, I think, if you have multiple delivery mechanisms for the patient experience, whether that's multiple hubs, especially pharmacies, and you have some that are internal. Being able to compare them and make sure that they're all consistently good is paramount. We talk about this in regular customer experience all the time, that customer experience in general is defined by how consistent you are delivering it. And if you have multiple ways to deliver it, that measurement of consistency is extremely important. And one, I think it's well worth the time and investment there.
Right. And that especially applies to the comment about hubs too, right? If you've got someone outside of your organization, that consistency is important too. So one other question before we wrap up here, which is, I'm working on a new drug that's coming to market. Where do I start?
I mean, I really think that there's a strong argument that putting together the plans for a measurement program around patient support services during launch should be part of the launch plan. It shouldn't be something thought about like a year after launch. You should be measuring how onboarding is going immediately, because that can make or break a product launch, is the uptick in your onboarding.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a key thing. This isn't an afterthought. This is something you should be working on as soon as practical. Now, as part of your product launch, as I was saying, we speak to folks who are in the clinical stage because they are trying to plan ahead. How long does it take to generally start up one of these programs? I think generally the quickest we've seen it get done is 1 month, and then the longest we've seen it go, if it's a very long approvals and the data file process, is up to 3 months. So that's the time you want to give yourself to say, when we're launching a new drug, that's the buffer window we want to give ourselves.
Speaking of that, and it's a little bit of a commercial here, but we've done this a lot for a variety of different manufacturers, and our questions have been vetted for multiple legal teams. So legal team review will be a big part of the timeline, and we've seen ours go through pretty quickly because it's been looked at by lots of different legal teams. And that's, I think, a consideration also. When you're figuring out when you're going to launch one of these, definitely put in time for that part of it.
It's good to get started as soon as possible, but also it's never too late. You haven't missed the boat on collecting feedback. And so if you're up and running now with the program, it doesn't mean it's stagnant. Always important to collect feedback. The experience is always changing, and now is the best time to start.
It was the old saying, what's the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, the next best time is today, right? It's like, what's the best time to collect feedback from patients and HCPs? As soon as you launch. And the next best time is tomorrow, right?
Right. I love that.
I mean, I think about it like that. It's never too late to get tremendous value out of it from really a patient perspective. The patients are the ones who really appreciate it in the long run, because you make changes to your program that benefits both them and future patients. And even individual patients who are struggling can be followed up on through these type of feedback programs to help them on board and get prepared for treatment.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean and Kirk, once again for this great conversation. And hey, thank you for joining us for PeopleMetrics Live. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe right here so you never miss an update. Have you checked out other sessions of PeopleMetrics Live yet? Click right here to watch them all. I'll see you there.